If you ever walk down the horror aisle and grab the loudest, weirdest, most outrageous box on the shelf, this episode is for you. We're diving into over-the-top horror movies from the VHS era, films that didn't aim for subtle. These are the splatter comedies, creature features, radioactive nightmares, and full-throttle cult classics that crank everything to maximum. Bigger effects, wilder concepts, stranger villains, and scenes that feel like they were made just to shock rental audiences. Some are funny, some are grotesque, some are just pure chaos. But all of them swing for the fences and never play it safe. Tonight, we're looking at horror movies that go completely off the rails in the best way. And that's exactly why we remember them. Killer Klowns from Outer Space, 1988. Klowns from Outer Space operates on pure nightmare logic. What if clowns were actually aliens who hunt humans using circus-themed weaponry? A small town is invaded by extraterrestrials who look like grotesque circus clowns, arriving in a spaceship disguised as a big top. They cocoon victims in cotton candy, hunt with acidic pies, and use balloon animals as tracking dogs, all played completely straight. The practical creature effects are the film's soul. Each clown has a distinct design and personality, brought to life through elaborate costumes, puppetry, and animatronics. The Kyoto brothers' background and effects work shows in every frame. These aren't just monster suits, but fully realized characters with unique movement and behavior. The spaceship interior is a carnival funhouse nightmare, all twisted corridors and bizarre architecture. Grant Kramer and Suzanne Snyder play the young couple, trying to convince authorities about the invasion, while John Allen Nelson adds heroism as an ice cream truck driver who becomes unlikely savior. The cast navigates the escalating chaos with appropriate urgency, treating the clown threat as genuinely dangerous rather than playing for laughs. This sincerity makes the horror comedy balance actually work. The film's tone is remarkably consistent. Scary enough to unsettle, weird enough to fascinate, and creative enough in its premise to remain memorable. Each clown weapon and hunting method feels like a twisted carnival game brought to life. Killer Klowns from Outer Space became an instant cult classic, representing everything great about 80s creature features: practical effects mastery, wild imagination, and commitment to ridiculous premises. The Stuff, 1985. It starts as a miracle product, a sweet, creamy substance that bubbles up from the ground and becomes an overnight sensation. Marketed aggressively and consumed obsessively, the stuff infiltrates households across America. Only a few people notice the truth. Those who eat it aren't just addicted, they're being hollowed out from the inside. Michael Moriarty plays an industrial saboteur with an oddball confidence that fits the film's off-kilter tone perfectly. Around him, Andrea Marcovici and Paul Sorvino populate a world driven by marketing slogans and corporate indifference. Performances skew strange by design, reflecting a society already primed to accept something harmful, as long as it's profitable. The horror is simple but effective. The white goop moves with unsettling autonomy, erupting from mouths, refrigerators, and walls. Practical effects keep everything tactile and unpleasant, leaning into messiness rather than polish. Larry Cohen stages the chaos with escalating absurdity, building toward a finale that embraces full-scale breakdown. The Stuff is satire first, creature feature second, and that's its strength. It's blunt, funny, and unapologetically weird, using B-movie trappings to land its critique. A scrappy, subversive film that understands exactly how far to push its idea. Demons, 1985. A masked stranger hands out free tickets to a late-night movie screening at a newly reopened Berlin theater. Inside, the audience watches a film about demonic possession, unaware that a cursed mask on display in the lobby is about to turn fiction into reality. When one attendee cuts herself on the mask, she transforms into something violent and inhuman. The infection spreads quickly, sealing the audience inside as the theater descends into chaos. The setup is simple, and the film wastes no time escalating. The cast functions less as traditional heroes and more as bodies caught in the wrong place. Panic replaces logic almost immediately. Characters react, fight, flee, or fail, often without warning or payoff. The effects are the main attraction. Sergio Stivoletti's makeup work is aggressive and tactile, with demons tearing their way out of human bodies. Transformations happen fast and without mercy. The gore is frequent and creative, favoring excess over realism. Set almost entirely inside the theater, the film uses balconies, aisles, and projection rooms as enclosed kill zones, keeping the pressure constant. Music plays a huge role in the film's identity. Claudio Simonetti's pulsing synth score is paired with loud rock tracks, giving the action a relentless, almost mechanical rhythm. Demons isn't interested in mythology or explanation. It's a straightforward siege movie built on momentum, noise, and practical effects. Loud, messy, and designed to hit hard before moving on. Re-Animator, 1985. Stuart Gordon's Re-Animator is a wild fusion of splatter horror and pitch-black comedy, loosely adapted from H.P. Lovecraft's Herbert West, Re-Animator. It tells the story of Herbert West, a brilliant but unhinged medical student who develops a glowing green serum capable of bringing the dead back to life. What begins as scientific ambition quickly spirals into chaos, gore, and madness. Jeffrey Combs steals the film as West, playing him with manic intensity and deadpan arrogance. His obsession with conquering death turns him into both the film's hero and its villain, a man as dangerous as the creatures he creates. Bruce Abbott provides the straight man as Dan Kane, the fellow student reluctantly drawn into West's experiments, while Barbara Crampton adds both humanity and vulnerability as Dan's girlfriend, Megan. What makes Re-Animator unforgettable is its audacity. The film doesn't just push boundaries, it smashes through them with gallons of blood and outrageous set pieces. From severed heads with a mind of their own to morgue corpses exploding into grotesque violence, Gordon leans into practical effects that are both shocking and darkly hilarious. Composer Richard Band's tongue-in-cheek score, riffing on Bernard Herrmann's Psycho theme, sets the perfect tone for the madness. Beneath the over-the-top gore lies a clever streak of satire. Re-Animator pokes fun at the arrogance of science, the institutions that enable it, and the fragile line between genius and insanity. It's messy, outrageous, and utterly fearless, a midnight movie classic that embodies the wild, anything-goes energy of 1980s horror. Army of Darkness, 1992. One wrong word, one swirling portal, and Ash Williams is hurled back to the year 1300, chainsaw, boomstick, and all. Captured by medieval knights mistaken for an enemy, Ash learns the only way home is retrieving the Necronomicon. But his arrogance awakens the army of the dead, a relentless horde of stop-motion skeletons marching on the castle. Sam Raimi trades cabin claustrophobia for full-blown fantasy spectacle. Sprawling castle sieges, steam-powered car battles, sweeping crane shots, and Ray Harryhausen-inspired undead legions. Bruce Campbell owns the screen as peak Ash, cocky, resourceful, and armed with immortal one-liners that turn every fight into legend. Practical effects shine in skeletal clashes, explosive gore, and elaborate miniatures, while Raimi's kinetic style keeps the action breathless and the comedy razor-sharp. Army of Darkness completes the trilogy's wild evolution, transforming gritty horror into high-spirited, quotable adventure. It cemented Ash as the ultimate wisecracking hero and remains the franchise's most exuberant, endlessly rewatchable chapter. Hail to the king, baby. The Toxic Avenger, 1984. Melvin is a shy janitor working at a health club in Tromaville, New Jersey. He's constantly mocked and pushed around until a prank sends him crashing into a vat of toxic waste. Instead of killing him, the exposure mutates his body and leaves him with superhuman strength. Adopting the name the Toxic Avenger, Melvin turns his anger outward, targeting criminals and corrupt figures who have taken over the town. The film establishes its tone immediately. Everything is exaggerated, crude, and intentionally abrasive. Mark Torgl plays Melvin with sincerity before the transformation, which helps sell the shift from victim to vigilante. Afterward, the creature is portrayed through a mix of performers in heavy makeup and suits emphasizing physical presence over polish. The villains are drawn in broad strokes, behaving more like comic book bullies than realistic threats. Violence is constant and unapologetically excessive. Heads are crushed, bodies are burned, and injuries are pushed well past realism. The effects are cheap but enthusiastic, leaning into mess and exaggeration rather than precision. The toxic Avenger's appearance, misshapen, scarred, and occasionally absurd, reflects the film's attitude toward its own limitations. Nothing is hidden or smoothed out. The toxic Avenger isn't subtle, and it isn't trying to be. It's built around shock value, crude humor, and a simple revenge fantasy aimed at outsiders and misfits. The movie's success came from committing fully to that approach, turning low-budget chaos into a defining statement for Troma. Loud, ugly, and intentionally offensive, it delivers exactly what it promises. Frankenhooker, 1990. A medical student loses his fiancée in a freak lawnmower accident. Unable to accept her death, he becomes obsessed with bringing her back to life. When her body proves unusable, he comes up with a new plan. Assemble a replacement using parts from multiple women he encounters on the streets of Times Square. The experiment works, but the result isn't the woman he remembers, and control slips away almost immediately. Rather than focusing on realism, the film leans into absurdity from the start. James Lorenz plays the grieving scientist as unhinged and obsessive, never fully in control of his own ideas. Patty Mullen carries the film as the resurrected Elizabeth, switching between innocence, confusion, and aggressive confidence as the character begins asserting her own identity. The supporting cast adds texture, avoiding caricature, even as the situations grow increasingly ridiculous. The effects are deliberately excessive. Gabe Bartalos's makeup and creature work favors stitched limbs, exposed wiring, and exaggerated transformations. Shooting on location in late 80s Times Square gives the film a grimy backdrop that grounds the chaos in a very specific moment in New York history. Frankenhooker is crude, strange, and unapologetically committed to its concept. Frank Henenlotter treats the premise seriously enough that the humor lands without undercutting the horror. It's exploitation cinema built on practical effects, bad taste, and complete conviction, never subtle but always intentional. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, 1986. 13 years after the original, Hooper returned to Leatherface and the Sawyer family. But this time, he was laughing. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 abandons the first film's grim realism for pitch-black comedy and over-the-top gore. A radio DJ accidentally records a chainsaw attack and becomes the target of the cannibalistic family, now operating out of an abandoned amusement park and selling their special chili at cook-offs. A former Texas Ranger obsessed with the family joins her to finally bring them down. Where the original was suffocating and brutal, the sequel is theatrical and manic. Dennis Hopper brings unhinged energy as the revenge-obsessed Ranger, chainsaw dueling his way through the finale. Caroline Williams plays the DJ with real toughness and humor, refusing to be just a victim. But it's Bill Moseley as Chop Top, Leatherface's Vietnam vet brother, who steals the film, delivering one of horror's most quotable, deranged performances. Tom Savini's gore effects are spectacular and excessive, finally delivering the explicit violence the first film only implied. The abandoned amusement park setting becomes a grotesque funhouse, all decay and neon, where the Sawyer family performs their madness like demented entertainers. Hooper leans into the absurdity, turning cannibalism into dark satire about American consumption and family values. Critics and audiences expecting Chainsaw's intensity were confused by the sequel's comedic tone, but it's aged remarkably well. Hooper was exploring different territory, using horror comedy to comment on Reagan-era excess while still delivering genuine shocks. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 proves he could revisit his most famous creation and find something new to say, even if it meant laughing at the darkness instead of drowning in it. Society, 1989. A teenager growing up among Beverly Hills wealth begins to feel out of place in his own life. Conversations feel rehearsed, smiles linger too long, and everyone seems invested in pulling him deeper into their world. His growing paranoia isn't just adolescent anxiety. It's a warning. Billy Warlock grounds the film with an anxious, searching performance that keeps the early sections restrained. The people around him behave just slightly wrong, creating a persistent sense of unease. Brian Usna lets the discomfort simmer, trusting atmosphere and implication long before revealing the full scope of the horror. When the truth finally surfaces, the film detonates. Screaming Mad George's effects turn bodies into malleable nightmares, merging, folding, and consuming one another in a grotesque spectacle. The infamous sequence is overwhelming by design, pushing practical effects into territory few films dared explore. Society is blunt in its metaphor and fearless in execution. It uses body horror to literalize class exploitation, stripping away any subtlety in favor of impact. Strange, confrontational, and unforgettable, it remains one of the most audacious cult films of its era. Dead Alive, 1992. Before Peter Jackson directed Hobbits to Middle-earth, he made one of the film in cinema history, a zombie splatter comedy where a Sumatran rat monkey bite transforms a New Zealand town into an ocean of blood, guts, and dismemberment. Dead Alive, released as Braindead internationally, follows Lionel, a timid mama's boy whose overbearing mother gets infected at the zoo and transforms into a ravenous zombie. His desperate attempts to hide her condition spiral into absolute carnage as the infection spreads. Jackson approaches the premise with gleeful excess, turning every scene into an opportunity for practical effects mayhem. The film builds from dark comedy to full splatter opera, climaxing in a lawnmower sequence that reportedly used 300 liters of fake blood. Bodies shredded into geysers of gore while Lionel mows through the undead hordes. It's cartoonishly violent, so over the top that it becomes absurdist comedy rather than disturbing horror. Timothy Balmain plays Lionel with remarkable sincerity, making his devotion to his monstrous mother genuinely touching, even as she's literally falling apart. Diana Peñalver brings warmth as his love interest who somehow tolerates the escalating nightmare. The film's heart comes from treating these characters as real people caught in impossible circumstances, which makes the horror comedy balance actually work. The zombie baby sequence alone, featuring an undead infant wreaking havoc in a park, showcases Jackson's willingness to push taste boundaries while maintaining pitch-perfect comedic timing. The practical effects by Richard Taylor and the Weta Workshop team are spectacular, creative, and relentlessly disgusting. Dead Alive represents splatter comedy at its absolute peak. Technically masterful, narratively coherent, and so committed to gore that it becomes its own form of art. Jackson proved he could orchestrate chaos on epic scale years before Middle-earth, just with significantly more intestines. If you love discovering forgotten horror and cult cinema, hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the films time forgot. Thanks for watching, and remember, always be kind and rewind, because every movie is someone's favorite.